Okay, let's take a look at this second set of problems here for today's lesson. Now, two things to note before we get going here. The first one is that we are limiting the universe of discourse. So when we use variables, for example, x, I guess I'll just list all of them, or z, right? Maybe some of you do z like that, whatever. Um, those can only represent human beings. That's what it actually means to restrict the universe of discourse. Now, actually, this is to make things easier for you when you're learning the point of today or this lesson or this particular section, which is overlapping quantifiers. So that's the second thing I want to talk about. We're going to be using overlapping quantifiers, which means you necessarily, or I think for almost all of these, or maybe all of them, you do have to use two different variables, right? So if you're going to be using both a universal and an existential, for example, you can't use an X again in that sentence, at least not there, because now let's just say we were to write something like, I don't know, this. Now we don't actually know what this X, links up to. Is it the existential? Is it the universal, right? So the second thing we really have to note, besides the fact that we're restricting the universe of discourse, is that we definitely have to be careful about making sure we use different variables for different quantifiers. Okay, from there, let's just do one kind of slowly, and then maybe we'll do another one. Okay, there is a person who is universally respected. All right, so first thing that I note here is that I want to figure out what kind of quantifiers am I using. So there's a person. That sounds to me like an existential quantifier, right? And then universally respected. That just means everyone respects this person. So I think maybe the best way to do this, eventually you'll be able to paraphrase these in your head so you can kind of almost immediately go into PL, and then you have to, once you have your formula in PL, you definitely want to read it again in English and see if it really does match up. But eventually you're going to paraphrase these pretty well on your own. For now, though, you really have to kind of take these steps to make sure the subject of the sentence in English lines up with the very first quantifier. So there is a person, there is some person, some X, that means it's an existential quantifier, who is universally accepted. Everyone respects them. So you definitely have to do these quantifiers in this order. That is required here because otherwise you will be saying something different. So that's the first thing you want to do. It's subject and predicate. And then what you want to do is make sure you kind of link up. Basically, whenever you read an X in the sentence, you read it as someone. So let me just write here the rest of the formula. It would look like that. And why is this the right translation in PL? Well, here's the way you would read it. There exists an X such that for all Y respect X. So that's the way to read it. Alternatively, you can say that this way. Everyone, right? Because everyone goes back to the universal. Sorry, the Y goes back to the universal. Respects someone, which goes back to the X. So, as long if you want to read the Y as everyone and the X as someone, that's okay too. What you need to do in that case, if you like to kind of, start from the predicate, from the relational predicate, you need to make sure that your quantifiers are in subject predicate order. And if you do that, that's fine. So I want to do one thing real quick. I want to show you what it would look like if we didn't have the restricted universe of discourse. So the restricted domain. So we would have to say something like this. Let me write it out without speaking. Okay, so that's substantially longer because we have to say, if we aren't restricting the universe of discourse, we have to say, first of all, that X is a human and all of Y are human, right? So this says there exists an X such that for all Y, X is a human, Y is a human too. and it's the case that everyone respects X. So that's obviously super annoying. So while you're getting used to overlapping quantifiers, I'm going to go ahead and restrict the domain of discourse. Otherwise, it just gets too much, right? So, okay. So that was a real quick aside. Okay, let's go ahead and do, I think looking at number 2 is helpful right now. So there is a person who respects everybody. There is a person, so the subject is an individual, there is an X, who respects everybody. So the predicate refers to everyone. So we begin again, the subject is an individual and the predicate is everyone else, or everyone including the individual. And now we want to say that this person respects everyone. So we begin with this person respects everyone. So notice that this looks a heck of a lot like the one from number 1, but the order of the individual terms or the individual variables in this case definitely matters. You read the first term, right? You read the X and then the predicate and then the second term. So it's definitely the case that you need to be very careful when you're writing these because, any little slip up, if you don't, if you aren't focusing or if you don't read it back to yourself, it might not say the right thing. So you definitely need to make sure to get those individual variables in the right order. That same thing goes for the individual terms, right? When you're talking about Sam and what is it, Pam and Sue, you have to make sure that those are in the right order too, right? The one in the middle, the singular term that comes first is read first, right? So that's the idea. Okay, let's just do one more because some of the ones down here are not, they're not, well, they're truth functional compounds. So they definitely have some variables, some quantifiers in there, but there's more going on. So let's do number 5 here. If everybody knows somebody, then somebody knows everybody. Why did I pick that one? Okay, let's make some room here just in case it doesn't fit. All right. I know ultimately that this is some sort of conditional, right? So if this, then this. So let's go ahead and get that horseshoe in there. We know it's going to be there, so might as well get it in there. If everybody knows somebody, somebody knows everybody. So those are 2 complete sentences, 2 complete propositions. The antecedent appears to be a everybody, somebody, right? So that is, the subject is a universal and the predicate is somebody, at least one person, right? So if everybody knows somebody, for all X, if for all X there exists a Y such that X knows Y, then somebody knows everybody. Now we have the essential in the subject part, and we have a universal over here in the predicate. Somebody knows everybody. Okay, so a lot of things to note here, but let me just say 2 things that come to mind. So first of all, very important to be able to read this back to yourself. So this is a very long one, but it says, if it is the case that for all X, there exists a Y such that everyone knows that someone. So if there's someone that everyone knows, then there exists an X such that for all Y, someone knows everyone, right? So it is kind of a tough one to read back to yourself, but what you want to make sure is that your subject and predicate are in order here, and that once you've designated, so in the antecedent, we decided, okay, the X is going to represent everyone. So make sure to read the X over here as everyone knows someone, right? And so over here, the X is someone. Make sure you read it as someone knows everyone, right? So make sure those things are done. That's very important. The second thing I want to say, though, is kind of just mechanics, but the scope of This here quantifier is the essential quantifier as well as basically everything up to here. So at that point, even though I've already used X and Y, I'm allowed to use them again. So that's an important thing to note. These are overlapping quantifiers. So would it make sense to use an X here? That would be definitely not okay. But I'm allowed to use the X again over here because that scope is basically done right here. That is a complete proposition as it is. And nothing links it to the content of this proposition. I mean, there is the conditional ultimately is the main operator here, but the variables here can be repeated if you want to say it that way. The scope is definitely over right there, so we can start a new one right here. So those are two things that I really wanted to focus on, but it's important that you read these back to yourself and make sure that they make sense. Also, whenever you can, or whenever you're talking about individual terms, for example, this one right here, make sure that you use, singular terms, make sure you use an individual term. So that would be a lowercase g, right? So some things to look out for. So this is, these are kind of tough. So if you have any questions, obviously feel free to email me, and I hope that was helpful.